The sound of the Vigeland Orchestra resounded melodiously in the golden lobby of the five-star hotel. On the ceiling, dozens of crystal chandeliers sparkle like stars. The 35th wedding anniversary party of Ms. Ha Thuy Lan, the most powerful businesswoman in the city, took place solemnly and lavishly. Present are most of the elite in the real estate industry, banking, and even TV stars. In the middle of that space, a girl wearing a simple cream-white silk dress stood quietly in the left corner of the stage. No one paid any attention to her, and if they did, they only looked at her with judgmental eyes. She doesn't have a diamond necklace, doesn't wear a fancy designer bag, doesn't wear expensive perfume. That girl is the only daughter-in-law of Mrs. Lan, wife of Tuan An, the only heir of the Nguyen family. The sound of glasses clinking gently as Mrs. Lan in a bright red evening gown stepped onto the stage, holding the microphone, smiling proudly. Thank you everyone for coming to celebrate with me and my husband. 35 years, together, we not only built a family but also an empire. I am proud that my son, Tuan An, will continue that career. And of course I have high expectations for the woman beside him. The applause was thunderous, but then Mrs. Lan suddenly turned to look at V, her eyes cold. Unfortunately, that expectation is misplaced. The space seemed to freeze, all eyes turned to V. Tuan An was about to step forward, but his mother held out her hand to stop him. Today is a special day, and I think I have the right to be honest. The woman Tuan An married was a poor country girl with no value at all. I don't know how she managed to make my son so infatuated, but to me she was never a daughter-in-law. Some guests began to whisper. No one expected Mrs. Lan to be so blunt. Some people wanted to stop her, but stopped because no one wanted to anger the real estate queen. Vi stood still without any objection, just bowed his head. She had gotten used to such words over the past year since she stepped into that luxurious villa. Mrs. Lan approached. V, standing just a few steps away from her, and continued to speak in a voice like a knife cutting into flesh. She thought that marrying Tuan An would change her life. You think I don't know your background? The daughter of a farmer in Tra Q district, after finishing high school, she returned to her hometown to raise chickens and grow vegetables. Do you know how many noble ladies have wanted to marry into my family? Vi looked up, eyes not angry, but strangely calm. I don't need anyone's pity. I didn't come here to fight for anything. No need for anyone's pity, Mrs. Lan laughed coldly. Then why didn't you dare refuse the prenuptial agreement I gave you? You signed it without thinking because you knew that, if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to set foot in this house. The space was suffocating. Tuan An clenched his fists, his lips pursed, but he didn't say anything. Because he bowed his head again, all eyes in the audience turned to her. There was pity, contempt, and curiosity. No one spoke up to defend her. Those who had called to borrow money from her, who had asked her for a job recommendation, now avoided looking. Mrs. Lan turned back to the stage, her tone as if she was declaring a sentence. From tomorrow I will, no longer, consider you as a daughter-in-law in this house. If Tuan An still wants to be the owner of this corporation, then be decisive. I will not allow a person without class to disgrace my family. The music stopped. No one dared to clap. The atmosphere became stifling. Even Mr. Ha, Mrs. Lan's husband, just kept silent and bowed his head. Some people were about to go get wine. Some glanced at each other, shaking their heads slightly. Tuan An looked at his wife, his eyes panicked. He walked over and held V's hand, stammering. Vi, I'm sorry. I didn't think Mom would say that. Vi gently pulled her hand out of his, smiling sadly. I don't need you to apologize. I just want to know when Mom insulted me. Like that, did you ever think of standing on my side? Tuan An was silent. He couldn't answer. She turned to her mother-in-law. Her eyes were different, no longer bowing her head in resignation, but a look full of understanding and strange sympathy. Mom can humiliate me because of my background, but I believe time We'll show you who is truly worthy of your pride. Some guests started looking at Vi differently. Her calmness did not resemble a weak person. In her eyes there was a quiet confidence, as if she was not as simple as people thought. Mrs. Lon sneered, turned away, and muttered, "So confident. A worthless girl. No education, no assets. Let's see what you can do." Vi stood still and then gently walked out of the hall. Each of her footsteps echoed across the marble floor, causing everyone present to feel a pang in their hearts. A waiter slowly bowed as she passed, his eyes filled with strange admiration. As the door closed, behind Vi, someone suddenly asked, softly, "What's her name?" "Vi, Tuanan's wife." "It's true, I saw her appear on international news with Mr. Haki Nakamura, but at that time her last name was Tran." Someone frowned. "Tran is Tran Gia Vin, no one dares to continue." Rain poured. Down outside the third balcony of the villa. In the large living room, Vi sat quietly folding each shirt, preparing to take them to the laundry as usual. No one in. This house considered her a daughter-in-law. They considered her a high-class servant who was allowed to use expensive things, but absolutely not allowed to enter their hearts. Tuan An walked in holding a box of Huavi tea that he used to like to drink. He sat down, next to his wife, his voice sad. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you that day." Vi did not look at him, just folded the last morning shirt. "It's okay, I'm used to it. I don't want you to suffer like that, but I know your mother. If you resist, Mom will cut you out of the inheritance, remove you from the CEO position, and push me away by all means." Because speaking fast, but still, keeping a gentle voice, I understand. Tuan An bowed his head. The silence between two people is more painful than 100 insults. I love Vi truly. She is the woman who made him give up on matchmaking with dozens of young ladies in the city. But love is one thing, but having the courage to protect, it is something he has not been able to do. Vienne is a teacher in the Northwest Highlands. She herself is not a country girl, as Mrs. Lon said. She once refused marriage proposals from colleagues and from rich boys in the province, just because her heart suddenly skipped a beat for Tuan An, a simple and gentle city boy who used to volunteer to teach at the place where she worked. Love came gently. The proposal was simple. She accepted that she had no material possessions, nor did she need a title. But she did not expect that entering that family would be the beginning of a series of days of constant insults. Mrs. Lon never hid her contempt. On her wedding night, she threw a stack of papers straight into his face, referring to the prenuptial agreement. She was not allowed to touch the property, not allowed to interfere in family affairs, and absolutely not allowed to have children for the first 3 years without permission. She has no good genetic value to bear the first grandson of this family. Mrs. Lan once told Vi directly like that in a family meeting. Not stopping there, she also forbade Vi from entering the family meeting room. When the whole family was at work, Vi was only allowed to sit in the dining room alone, listening to laughter coming from behind the closed door. Not a day goes by without mocking looks, without prying eyes. The most enthusiastic person was none other than Lin, Tuan An's cousin. Lin is a famous beauty blogger, once considered by Mrs. Lan as the ideal daughter-in-law, and almost married Tuan An if Vi had not appeared. Every time Vi appeared, Lin threw her a mocking look. "Sister Vi, are you wearing market clothes again today? I heard that your family used to have a flock of dozens of chickens. Why don't you bring them to the city to sell? No need to spend this family's money." Vi just kept silent. She didn't respond, but that silence made Lin even more uncomfortable. One time when the whole family was having dinner together, the atmosphere seemed peaceful. Mrs. Lan suddenly put down her chopsticks, her eyes sharp as a knife. I thought, carefully, if Miss Vi still had any self-respect, she should withdraw with honor. She is not worthy of this family. I will not let her drag Tuan An down into her classless quagmire. Tuan An put his chopsticks down hard on the table, his voice full of dissatisfaction. "You're too much, Mom. Vi is your wife. She did nothing wrong." Mrs. Lan stood up, pointing straight at her son's face. If you still want to sit in the CEO position of Hathui Group, then divorce. Immediately, either her or your career, choose. The atmosphere froze. All eyes turned to Tuan An as they looked at him. Once more, waiting for an act of protection. But Tuan An just looked down and said nothing. Vi slowly wiped her mouth with a cloth and stood up. She bowed to the entire dining table. I asked permission to go to my room. Thank you everyone for letting me know where I was. She left. The whole room was silent. A moment later, Lynn curled her lips slightly, so she knew what was going on. But no one saw that in her own room. Vi was hugging her chest tightly, tears falling, non-stop. No matter how strong she was, her heart was still a heart that knew pain. That night, the whole city was brightly lit, in the event celebrating the 25th anniversary of Hathui Group. A lavish party was held at the hotel 6 days later on the banks of the Saigon River, where the elite from all over Asia are present. Because she just stood quietly in a hidden corner in a simple but elegant white dress, her eyes turned to the stage where her husband Tuan An was speaking. She knew she was not allowed to sit in the family row. Mrs. Lan had declared before that she did not represent Hak Tui, not qualified to sit in the seat of honor. Vi did not complain. She just smiled because tonight everything would change. After the speech, the MC solemnly announced, "We would like to introduce a special guest who has just arrived in Vietnam, Mr. Heiki Nakamura, General Director of the Hoganoya International Finance Group in Japan." The whole class clapped their hands. Mr. Heiki is a very famous name in the financial world. The person who holds hundreds of billions of dollars in investments, power equal to governments. Mrs. Lan sat up straight and adjusted her designer silk scarf. Tuan Ang was confused because he didn't know when this guest was invited, but the most surprising thing was that Mr. Heiki did not go on stage. He walked straight towards Vi in front of the astonished eyes of hundreds of people. "Miss Vi," he said in Japanese and bowed deeply. It was the Japanese etiquette for someone who had saved my life. The whole hall was silent. "Are you well, miss? I am honored to meet again, the girl whose father saved my life from an assassination attempt in Kyoto." "Thank you, sir. I am well," Vi replied, in native-like Japanese, and then gently switched to Vietnamese. "But please don't call me miss. Here I am, just an ordinary wife. Nothing more, nothing less." Whispers arose throughout the auditorium. Mrs. Lan turned, pale. Lynn widened. Her eyes, Tuan An was speechless. Mr. Hai Kim smiled kindly. "I understand, but I still want to thank your father, Mr. Tran Gia Vin, the man who changed my life." As soon as the name Tran Gia Vin rang out, the entire financial community in the room jumped up. It was an extremely secretive name, but was known as the dark market takeover man of the Asian market. Few people had ever met him, and even fewer knew him. "He has a daughter." Mrs. Lan clenched her wine glass tightly, almost dropping it. Tuan An walked towards Vi, unable to hide his surprise. "Vi, you are Mr. Tran Gia Vin's daughter." Vi looked at him, her eyes calm. "Not a biological daughter, an adopted daughter. When I was 8 years old, my biological parents died in an accident. He adopted me and raised me like his own. But he always taught me to live humbly, not to rely on power or status to oppress others." Vi's eyes sharpened, looking straight at Mrs. Lan. I had warned my mother not to judge others by their appearance, but she didn't listen. She thought I was simple, poor, and not worthy of entering this house. She humiliated me countless times, forcing me to live like a maid. The atmosphere was thick, as if someone had just poured a bucket of cold water into the entire hall. Mrs. Lan stood up. "You lied to me. You approached Tuan An for money for a position in the company." Vi interrupted with a confident voice. "I never needed your money. I got married, with Tuan An only with my heart. I used to hide my identity because I wanted to live a normal life, not under the guise of a billionaire's daughter. I want to be seen as myself, a woman, a wife, not a title." Tuan An took a step back, He remembered every word Vi had said before when she said, "Let me prove my worth with my actions." Now he understood that she had sacrificed her identity to live for this love, and he did not have the courage to protect her. Mr. Haikian's voice was like a judge giving the final verdict. If Hathui Group continues to despise COVID, I'm afraid my investment fund will withdraw all its capital. And I believe Mr. Trangiavin will also not be happy to know that his daughter was humiliated. Mrs. Lan almost fell. Hathui Group is living on preferential loans and foreign investment shares. If Mr. Haikai withdraws his capital, the whole empire will shake. No one dares to speak up. I looked at Tuanan. She spoke softly, but each word was like a knife. I've been waiting for you to say. Something protected me for the past 2 years, but I never dared. Today I don't need you to say anything anymore because I'm strong enough to stand alone. She turned her back and left the hall, her steps decisive, light, and proud. Tuanan wanted to chase after her, but his legs were like stone. He knew he had just let go of the most valuable woman in his life. The auditorium exploded in a wave of mixed emotions. No one expected the girl that Mrs. Lan called an unworthy daughter-in-law to be a strong woman who hid her identity, a person respected by the entire financial world, a heart that chose to love with all her heart, not needing money or power. As for Mrs. Lan, she could only bow her head. Bao had just chased away the most precious gem in her son's life. Just 3 days later, on the night of that earth-shattering event, rumors spread like undercurrents in the investment world that the Hathui Group had seriously disrespected the adopted daughter of Mr. Trangiavin, a figure holding many strategic investment funds across Asia. Initially, the group Haganoya withdrew its capital, followed by a series of international partners sending letters of contract cancellation from Scoria Capital to the technology company Bluet from Singapore. The media began to question the serious internal problems in Hathui Group. The stock price plummeted. In less than a week, the group lost more than 30% of its market value. The CEO's office became a place where Ms. Lan sat with her head in her hands amid piles of documents canceling cooperation. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes were dark from lack of sleep. All because of that little girl. Ms. Lan gritted her teeth. But deep down she understood that this was no longer a personal matter, but the price she was paying for her arrogance and contempt for others over the years. Meanwhile, those who used to laugh at Vi suddenly changed their attitudes. Her cousin Lin, who used to not hesitate to mock my Vi at every family meal, now changed her face frighteningly quickly. "Sister Vi, I'm sorry. I was just joking that day. Actually, I've always admired you." Vi just smiled slightly, her eyes not hiding her tired expression. "You don't need to apologize to me because I never expected you to respect me." Then she gently turned away, leaving Lin standing there speechless for the first time in her life, understanding what it was like to be politely despised. That night, the Hathui villa was filled with a stifling atmosphere. Tuanan stood in front of Vi's room for the first time. Hesitant, the door opened slightly. Vi stood there, her eyes still calm as usual, but her cheeks were more sunken. She folded her clothes into the suitcase. Tuanan swallowed. He wanted to apologize. For what? For not protecting you, for letting his mother treat you badly, and for leaving you alone in this marriage. Vi paused for a moment, but then she continued, stacking her voice even. "I'm sorry for all the right things, but it's too late. I don't want to be in this house anymore. I'm tired." "Vi, don't go. We can start over." Vi turned to look at him, her eyes deeply sad. "You don't understand. I didn't leave because I was angry or resentful. I left because I needed to keep my last bit of self-respect. I can't live in a house where every square inch is contempt and humiliation. I tried enough." Tuanan was speechless as he walked out of the room, suitcase in hand, heading straight to the lobby where Mrs. Lan and her family members were gathered. Her every step echoed. The space seemed to freeze. Balan stood up, her eyes tense. "Where are you going? This house is not a hotel to come and go as you please." Vi stopped and slowly turned around. Before everyone's eyes, she raised her left hand, took off her sparkling wedding ring and placed it on the wooden board in the middle of the room. I came here with love, lived here, with patience, but left because I had nothing left to hope for. This ring will be returned to the Vu family. I am no longer your daughter-in-law and I don't need anyone's pity. Mrs. Lon choked, but this time she couldn't say anything more. No one dared to defend her. Vice turned away, not crying, not looking back. The whole hall was silent. Only the sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the tiled floor remained. The dry sound like a verdict for the cruel days that Vi had to endure. When the villa gate slammed shut behind Vi, Mrs. Lon collapsed onto the chair, her eyes lifeless. Tuanan was still standing where she had just left. His heart felt like it had fallen into the abyss. He realized that he had truly lost her. The next morning, Mrs. Lon received a letter from Mr. Tran Gia-Vin himself, with only one line of words. Sometimes people need to lose the most precious things to learn how to respect. She trembled and dropped the letter, tears flowing silently. Not because of anger, but because for the first time, in her life she felt so small and blameworthy. 3 months had passed since the day Vi left the villa. Hatui, no more fancy dresses, no more luxurious parties, or the prying eyes of those who used to look down on her. Vi returned to the quiet job that Ms. Hang loved, opening a free class for poor children. The place she chose was a suburban area, far from the city, where the roofs were made of extremely crooked corrugated iron, where the laughter of children mixed with the night sounds of a mother selling lottery tickets. Every morning she cycled to a small classroom of less than 30 square meters with an old blackboard. The chairs were borrowed from discarded schools. But the children's eyes always lit up every time Vi entered, carrying a gentle and knowledgeable smile. One rainy afternoon, when Vi was wiping the board after school, a figure appeared at the door. She turned around, her eyes suddenly stunned. Mrs. Lan, the woman who once stood at the pinnacle of power, once coldly uttered the most cruel words. The day the devil sat in the middle of the classroom, her shoulders trembling under the drizzling rain. I came to apologize to Vitar's student. The little girl had just run out the door when she stopped, looking at that unbelievable scene. I hurriedly stepped out to help her up, but Mrs. Lan looked up, her eyes red, not letting her help. Let me kneel. Let me make up for the words I said, the contemptuous looks, the times I made my child cry. She stood still. Mrs. Lan took out a water-stained letter from her pocket and gave it to Vi. Your foster father, Mr. Tran Gia-Vin, came to see me privately. Vi was silent. Mrs. Lan continued, her voice trembling. He didn't say much, just asked me one question. Did a person of truly noble status ever need to humiliate others? I couldn't sleep that night, remembering every look in my child's eyes, every tear. I knew I was wrong. Vi bent down, gently took her hand and helped her stand up in the middle of the wet schoolyard. I don't blame her at all, because if it weren't for all of that, I wouldn't have this day. A week later, a man quietly appeared next to the classroom, watching Vi sitting teaching the children to spell. His eyes followed. Her every move, his eyes contained remorse, longing, and determination. It was Tuanan. When the children finished school, he walked in holding a bag of cookies and a few new books. Vi looked up, momentarily stunned, but she did not avoid him, just nodded slightly. What are you doing here? Tuanan was silent. For a moment, then gently, came to learn how to be a human again. He did not need to say nice words. I did not need pity. It was not pity, but he wanted to go with me no matter who I was, where I lived. He just asked for a chance to start over with actions, not words. I looked at him for a long time, then turned and walked inside. Tuanan thought he was rejected, but at that moment Vi said softly, the class still lacks someone to clean the afternoon. If you don't mind, we can try starting from there. Since that day, every afternoon, people saw a tall man holding a wet towel, carefully wiping away every trace of chalk left on the board. Sometimes he clumsily poured out the whole bucket of water. The children laughed out loud, and Vi couldn't help but laugh too. Love seems to be pieced together little by little with sincerity, with small but sincere actions. 3 months later, the small classroom was renovated with a projector, storybooks, and a mini playground for the children. People don't know who the sponsor is. They just see that Ms. Vi and the blackboard eraser are always the last ones to stay, every day. And what's more special is that Mrs. Lan also started to appear. At first, she just stood outside the fence looking in. Then she brought in a box of cookies, colored pencils, rolled up her sleeves to mop the classroom floor, collected candy, wrappers, and sometimes read stories to the children before school ended. One afternoon, a little girl named Ha, who had studied with Vi since the early days, asked Mrs. Lan, "Grandma, why do you come here to wipe the board every day?" Mrs. Lan smiled as she looked at Vi sharing cakes with the children, her voice as light as the wind. Because she used to not understand the value of a person, but now she knows that anyone can learn again if they truly want to change. The story ends with the image of Vi and Tuan An standing in front of a spacious new classroom, preparing to organize a mid-autumn festival for poor children. The late afternoon sunlight shone on the blackboard, where the neat handwriting of the little teacher and student was still visible. Never judge a book by its cover. If this story touched your heart, then our journey is just beginning. Like and subscribe to Heroic Echoes. And don't forget to share this story with the people you care about most, because every echo has the power to become a hero's story.